So Christian leaders have been warning us for some time that one of the greatest threats facing the faith is the disgusting and reprehensible scourge, nay, abomination of cultural Christianity.
I think Christians need to reframe that a lot of what is burning up is actually not genuinely held faith. Right. It's actually cultural Christianity.
And so the death of cultural Christianity is, I think, very good news for the church.
Cultural Christianity is burning up. That's where we're at. Yeah. It's burning up. All that's left is a resilient, super robust discipleship to Jesus.
This is the thing which you see in the Bible Belt in the southern states, where people do terrible, terrible things like go to church and espouse Christian morality. But is it really the major threat that it's being made out to be? And is the collapse of cultural Christianity going to lead to what we're told it's going to lead to, namely a more pure church and easier evangelism because non-Christians know who they are? Now, in case you couldn't tell from my sarcastic and hilarious intro,
hilarious.
I don't think so, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, to be clear, there is an assumption in places like that, and I live in one, Northern Ireland is a bit like that if you go to church and you espouse some sort of Christian morality, that is what makes you a Christian, which of course it doesn't. It's not the same thing as saving faith. But at the same time, I want to give you 3 reasons why cultural Christianity, as maligned as it is not in fact as bad as it's being made out to be. And I'm going to do it using a story, using an argument, and using data. So first, the story. Many of you will have heard of Richard Dawkins, who's a very famous atheist, but you may not have heard of his assistant, Josh Timonen. He was part of his US team, where he did tours with him and he did merchandise and built the website, but he left working for them and in the atheist cause in general when he moved to Portland, which was, of course, a terrible mistake. Now, for those who don't know, Portland experienced months and months of mostly peaceful riots during the Summer of Love in 2020. And so Josh and his family decided to move to somewhere that was a little bit more peaceful and a little bit more family friendly. And they ended up in Waco, Texas. And if you want to know what Waco, Texas is like, just picture Portland, Oregon, and then picture the exact opposite. On arrival, they realized that they didn't have a lot of community. And so they started doing what people do there, which was going to church. And I don't know whether this was just because they liked this particular one more or they wanted to be as Texan as possible, but they ended up going along to a cowboy church. And you might think that this would be a terrible place for people like that. But over time, after months of listening to the gospel, their hearts softened and they became Bible-believing Christians. Yes, you heard me right. God saved the assistant of Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous and aggressive atheists in the world, through cowboy church. Yeah! And there are lots of stories like this, and these stories go both ways. Let me ask you this. How many people do you know that grew up in a Christian context, but then moved to a culturally liberal context and liberalized or deconverted from their Christian faith? Did cultural liberalism fail? No, it didn't. It worked quite well. And if we accept it going that way, we should accept it going the other way. Whenever people move into culturally Christian areas, their chances of becoming a real Christian actually increase. So that's the story. Now let me give you the argument. I remember growing up listening to, and I'm going to show my age here, a Christian band called DC Talk. And one of the songs in their album, Jesus Freak, opens with a quote from Brennan Manning.
The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians, who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable.
Now that sounds good. It is a critique of kind of a hypocritical, cultural, merely adopted Christianity. There's some truth within that. But the idea that that's the single greatest cause of atheism in the world today, simply not correct. Imagine you wanted to make a nation atheist. Would you start by going out and building lots of church buildings and encouraging people to go to them and expecting people to promote Christian virtue? I somehow don't think you'd find that in the manual for making atheist nations.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
And whilst cultural Christianity is not sufficient, there's potential in it for hypocrisy and deception, it's still pretty Christian, right? If we think about cultural Islam, for instance, plenty of people in those contexts don't actually follow Islam, but is it still fairly Islamic? Yes, it is. Does it create an environment where you're going to get way more actual Muslims? Yes, it does. People often use the quote that going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to McDonald's makes you a hamburger.
And we're loving it.
which is, true-ish, except for the fact that church is a place where a lot of people actually become Christians. A more accurate analogy would be that going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to a place that takes humans and turns them into McDonald's hamburgers makes you a McDonald's hamburger. Now that I think about it, it's quite a disgusting analogy, but it is nonetheless true. Going to church might not make you a Christian, but it does exponentially increase your chances of becoming one. A church is a place where people are fairly open to the gospel, where they hear it regularly, and a lot of them do go on to then have a real faith. So you can see the logic here. Cultural Christianity often is a gateway into true faith. That's the argument. Now for the data. If the idea that cultural Christianity is a threat to sincere faith is true, then we would expect in places that reject cultural Christianity to see significant salvations and church growth and a really devout, pious faith in those areas. Is that what we see? No, we do not. And we can see this in action when we look at deep blue states that vote Democrat. Now, in no way am I equating the Republican Party with Christianity, but I am equating the idea that we should have abortions up until birth and transition children, which is the platform of the Democratic Party, as a rejection of cultural Christianity. I don't think that's a major leap.
Makes sense.
So what do we see in these states where that cultural Christianity has disappeared? Well, what we see is very low church attendance, at least by an American standard. If you look at the bottom 10 states for church attendance, you look at places like Vermont and Maine, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, what you will see is that they're pretty much all deep blue. You have one swing state in there, you've got Wisconsin, but everything else is blue. So you've got very low cultural Christianity and then very low actual Christianity. Alternatively, if you look at the places with the highest church attendance, you will see that they are all red states there. Tennessee and Alabama and Mississippi and South Carolina. Places like that. And let's take the extremes. In Vermont, only 21% of people attend a church service weekly. In Tennessee, which is one of the highest, 51% attend church weekly. Are you really going to sit there and make the argument that the extra 30% of the population who go to church every week, are you going to say that they're all insincere, they're all hypocrites, that none of them are real Christians? And at the same time make the argument that everybody in Vermont who's going to faith is a sincere Christian? Is that the position you're going to hold? And in fact, when we look at the quality of the Christianity in these states, it actually seems to be the reverse. Sure, in culturally Christian states, you have some superficiality, you maybe have some prosperity gospel, there's plenty of issues. But if you're trying to find the drag queen churches, the pride marching churches, the sparkle creed churches, which is a thing.
I believe in the non-binary God whose pronouns are plural.
You're not going to find those in Mobile, Alabama. And this has an important missional impact for us as Christians. Now, of course, God can do what he wants, and there are examples of cultural Christianity going away and the church growing. You've got China, you've got Iran, where there's real persecution and massive church growth. Praise God, God can do what he likes. But at the same time, there are normal means through which God actually works. And for every China, you've got a Soviet Russia. You've got North Korea. In the south, there's mega churches all over the place. In North Korea, you've got very few Christians. Even take somewhere like New York, where there are very few churches and a lot of compromised churches, and Dallas, Texas, where there's tons of churches and lots of them are very faithful. So whilst anomalies exist, there's a very clear pattern that the more culturally Christian a place is, the easier it is to reach them with the gospel. It turns out that the greatest cause of atheism in the world today is in fact militant atheism, which rejects, ostracizes and persecutes the church. It's not as cool of a quote, but it is more true. And whilst cultural Christianity has problems and does need challenged, the destruction of it is not something that Christians should advocate, celebrate, or take part in. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. The most open group of people in the Western world to the gospel right now are cultural Christians. These are people who have an affinity for the things that Christianity has built, and they don't like seeing it destroyed. You have the Freedom Convoy in Canada who were kneeling and praying the Lord's Prayer, not a Christian movement, but had a respect for cultural Christianity. You have other figures like J.P. Sears, who moved from a liberal place to a conservative place, developed a respect for cultural Christianity, and has gone on to become a devout Christian.
I changed my mind about God. I was wrong.
These are people who recognise that the sort of neo-pagan secularism that's destroying the West is evil, and if instead of saying to them, oh look, you suck and everything you stand for is terrible and the death of the West is a wonderful thing, if instead of saying that we said, no, we agree, but you need to go on the whole way and actually embrace Christ for yourself. You need to have a sincere, devout, personal faith, not merely a cultural faith. They are the people who are open to the gospel right now. And if we do that, instead of seeing the death of Christianity, we may in fact see a revival. We may see all of these cultural Christians go on to become real Christians. And if we look around right now, they are the ones who are most open to doing so. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment if you're on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, please retweet it. Also, the inspiration for this video came from a website called TruthScript. Not affiliated with them, but I love their work. Please do check them out. I'll link them or tag them. If you want to support the channel, you can help on Patreon or through PayPal, or you can pick up something from wearecontramundum.com. And if you're on YouTube and you're interested in more videos on Christianity and culture, this next video is for you.